The countdown timer on the boardroom screen showed 3 minutes and 47 seconds when I realized my 20-year career was about to end in the most spectacular way possible. But let me back up and tell you how I got there, sitting in Murphy's pub across the street, watching my own company implode in real time. I'm Rick Patterson, 52 years old, and until 9:30 that morning, I was Chief Technology Officer at SecureFlow Financial, responsible for a cybersecurity infrastructure that processed $950 million in daily transactions. 20 years I'd spent building those systems from the ground up, surviving the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial meltdown, and countless digital transformation initiatives that came and went like seasonal flu. The morning started like any other acquisition review meeting. Big conference room on the 22nd floor, wall-mounted displays showing our security metrics in real time, and buyers from Chicago and New York patched in via video conference. We were looking at a potential $240 million buyout. Not bad for a regional fintech company that started in a strip mall office back in 2004. I'd been preparing for this presentation for 8 months. Every compliance checkbox green, every vulnerability assessment completed, every regulatory requirement documented in triplicate. The system was running flawlessly, 99.97% uptime, 0 security breaches, and SOX compliance certifications that made federal auditors actually smile. Brandon Walsh, our 35-year-old CEO, had joined the company 18 months ago when our original founder retired. Fresh out of a Silicon Valley startup that got acquired by Google, full of buzzwords about disrupting legacy financial systems and streamlining operational inefficiencies. Translation: he wanted to fire anyone over 45 and replace them with cheaper talent who'd work 80-hour weeks for equity that might be worth something someday. The presentation was going perfectly until 9:47 a.m. I was walking through our multi-layered authentication protocols, explaining how we'd never lost a single transaction to fraud, when Brandon raised his hand. Not the polite kind of interruption you'd expect during a professional presentation, the kind that cuts through a room like a fire alarm. Actually, he said, standing up slowly, I think this is a good time to discuss some organizational changes we're implementing as part of our modernization strategy. The room went quiet. The Chicago buyers leaned forward on their video screens. Our chief legal officer, Janet Morrison, looked confused. This wasn't on the agenda. Brandon walked to the front of the room, that startup CEO confidence radiating from every step. Rick has done excellent work building our legacy systems, but as we move forward, we need leadership that understands current technology paradigms, legacy systems. 20 years of bulletproof cybersecurity architecture, and he called them legacy systems. Effective immediately, Brandon continued, his voice carrying that practice cadence of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Rick Patterson is transitioning out of his role to pursue other opportunities. The words hit like a physical blow. Behind me, the massive screen displaying my security dashboard suddenly shifted. My presentation vanished, replaced by a corporate termination notice with my name typed neatly at the top. He'd orchestrated the whole thing, firing me in front of potential buyers, making it look like a strategic decision rather than what it really was, ageism dressed up as innovation. The junior analyst next to me dropped his stylus. Janet's mouth fell open. Even the HR representative looked shocked, though she probably helped draft the paperwork. The humiliation was surgical, precise, and completely intentional. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room. 20 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, emergency calls at 2 a.m. when servers hiccuped. I'd built their entire security infrastructure from scratch, trained their staff, created documentation that federal regulators used as examples for other companies. And this was my reward. Public execution disguised as corporate strategy. But here's the thing about spending 2 decades in cybersecurity. You learn to think 3 moves ahead. You plan for every contingency, including the possibility that your own management might become a security threat. I'd built those systems with certain safeguards in place. Not revenge code. Nothing that childish. Professional fail-safes designed to prevent unauthorized access during critical operations like, say, acquisition reviews. Without saying a word, I closed my laptop. The click echoed in the silent room. I gathered my leather portfolio, the same one Brandon had mocked as analog thinking in a digital world, and walked to the door. No arguments, no pleading, no dramatic speeches. Just the sound of my footsteps on polished concrete and the weight of their stares following me out. The elevator ride down felt like descending into freedom. I crossed the street to Murphy's Pub, ordered a whiskey neat, and took a booth with a perfect view of the 22nd floor. The bartender, a guy named Tommy who'd served lunch to Secure Flow employees for years, poured an extra finger without being asked. "Rough morning?" he asked. "Getting better," I said, opening my portfolio to the incident response protocols I'd updated just last week. At 10:15 a.m., exactly 28 minutes after Brandon's announcement, the first authentication warning appeared on their screens. The authentication warning that appeared on the Secure Flow screens at 10:15 a.m. was deceptively simple. Multi-factor verification required. Chief Security Officer authorization pending. From my booth at Murphy's, I could imagine the confusion rippling through that conference room. The junior analyst probably read it aloud, his voice cracking slightly. The Chicago buyers would lean forward on their video screens, eyebrows raised, and Brandon would wave it off with that startup CEO dismissiveness he'd perfected. But Janet Morrison, our chief legal officer, wouldn't be so easily reassured. She understood compliance requirements better than anyone in that room. SOX regulations, PCI DSS standards, federal banking oversight. She knew that multi-factor authentication wasn't just a suggestion during acquisition reviews. It was mandatory. My phone buzzed. A text from Janet. "Rick, what's happening with the system? Brandon says it's a glitch." I sipped my whiskey and typed back. "System's working exactly as designed." The authentication protocol I'd implemented wasn't revenge code. It was professional cybersecurity practice. When you're handling financial transactions worth nearly $1 billion daily, you don't leave critical system access to chance. Every major operation, software updates, configuration changes, security audits, and yes, acquisition reviews, required verification from the designated Chief Security Officer. That was me. Or rather, that had been me until 9:47 a.m. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark Collins, our senior systems administrator, one of the few people I'd trained personally over the past 5 years. "Rick, the authentication prompt is locked. Brandon's asking for override procedures." Override procedures. Of course he was. I'd designed the system with multiple safeguards, each one documented in federal compliance filings. The authentication wasn't just about passwords or security tokens. It required biometric verification, security clearance validation, and most importantly, active employment status verification through our HR database. The same HR database that had processed my termination at 9:47 a.m. At 10:32 a.m., the second warning appeared. Authentication timeout in 45 minutes. System lockdown will engage to protect fiduciary operations. My phone started ringing. First Janet, then Mark, then numbers I didn't recognize, probably executives trying to reach me through the company directory. I let them all go to voicemail. The beauty of good cybersecurity architecture is that it's transparent when everything's working normally, but becomes absolutely rigid when threats are detected. The system I'd built over 20 years viewed unauthorized access attempts during acquisition reviews as exactly that, threats. Brandon's termination of the chief security officer during an active compliance audit had triggered automated protocols designed to prevent exactly this scenario. Not because I was petty, but because federal regulators had seen too many companies compromise their security during high-stakes financial operations. At 10:45 a.m., Brandon apparently decided to take matters into his own hands. Mark texted me. He's demanding the emergency override codes. Says it's just a technical glitch. Emergency override codes. I documented those procedures thoroughly, filed them with our insurance company and federal compliance officers. They existed for genuine emergencies, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, situations where normal security protocols might prevent life-saving operations. Being inconvenienced during a voluntary acquisition review didn't qualify. But Brandon didn't know that. He saw override codes and assumed they were a magic solution to technical problems. The same mindset that viewed 20 years of institutional knowledge as legacy thinking. From my booth, I watched office workers moving behind the windows of the 22nd floor, probably scrambling, making phone calls, trying to figure out why their supposedly routine acquisition presentation had turned into a technical crisis. My whiskey was warming up, but I wasn't in a hurry. I'd spent 2 decades responding to urgent system alerts, dropping everything to fix problems that couldn't wait. Emergency calls during family dinners, weekend troubleshooting sessions, vacation days interrupted by security incidents, Today, their emergency was just Tuesday afternoon entertainment. At 11:15 a.m., the third warning appeared. Final authentication attempt. 30 minutes remaining. The calls were coming faster now. Brandon himself tried reaching me, probably swallowing whatever pride he had left. The voicemail he left was classic. "Rick, I know we had some differences this morning, but we need to resolve this technical issue professionally. The buyers are asking questions. Technical issue." He still didn't understand what he'd done. I opened my portfolio and reviewed the compliance documentation I'd filed with the SEC 6 months earlier. Standard cybersecurity protocols for financial institutions undergoing acquisition reviews. Every procedure documented, every safeguard explained, every contingency planned for including unauthorized termination of key security personnel during critical operations. The regulators had loved that particular section. They'd seen too many companies get hacked during mergers and acquisitions, when normal security procedures were relaxed to accommodate due diligence reviews. At 11:30 a.m., Mark sent his final text. "Brandon's using the emergency override. Says he's taking full responsibility." I finished my whiskey and signaled Tommy for another. Brandon was about to learn the difference between taking responsibility and understanding consequences. The emergency override existed, exactly as documented, but using it during a non-emergency situation while key security personnel were unavailable triggered a different set of protocols entirely. Protocols designed to protect the company from exactly the kind of reckless decision-making Brandon was about to demonstrate. The countdown timer on their screens now showed 15 minutes and falling. At 11:45 a.m., Brandon Walsh made the decision that would cost SecureFlow financial everything. From my booth at Murphy's, I couldn't see the exact moment he entered the emergency override codes, but I knew it was happening. The system I'd built sent automated alerts to my personal device whenever critical security protocols were breached. My phone buzzed with a single notification. Emergency override activated. Non-emergency conditions. Compliance violation logged. 20 years of cybersecurity experience had taught me that the most dangerous people in any organization are those who confuse authority with expertise. Brandon had the CEO access codes, but he didn't understand the systems those codes controlled. The emergency override wasn't a magic solution to authentication problems. It was a scalpel designed for very specific scenarios: natural disasters, terrorist attacks, situations where normal security procedures might prevent life-saving operations. Federal banking regulations required these overrides to exist, but they also required extensive documentation of when and why they were used. Using emergency protocols during a voluntary acquisition review, especially after terminating key security personnel, wasn't just poor judgment. It was a federal compliance violation that would trigger automatic reporting to multiple regulatory agencies. But Brandon didn't know that. He saw override codes and assumed they were a technical workaround, like rebooting a frozen computer. At 11:46 a.m., the screens in the SecureFlow conference room went green. Authentication bypassed, system access restored, metrics flowing normally. For exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds, Brandon looked like a hero who'd solved a complex technical problem through decisive leadership. The Chicago buyers leaned back in their chairs, relief visible on their faces. The junior analyst exhaled loudly. Even Janet Morrison seemed to relax slightly, though I knew she was still uncomfortable with the whole situation. Brandon probably took a victory lap around the conference room, explaining to the potential buyers how quickly SecureFlow could adapt to unexpected technical challenges, how their agile leadership team could make tough decisions under pressure. What he didn't understand was that those 3 minutes and 17 seconds were a grace period built into the system. A brief window designed to prevent immediate lockdown in case someone accidentally triggered emergency protocols. But the system was also monitoring everything that happened during that grace period. Every access attempt, every data query, every transaction processed under emergency override conditions. And it was comparing those activities against the documented justification for activating emergency protocols in the first place. At 11:49 a.m., the grace period expired. Every screen in the SecureFlow building went black simultaneously. Not just the conference room, every workstation, every server monitor, every display panel throughout the entire facility. Then, across the void of every monitor, white letters appeared. Emergency override misuse detected. Regulatory compliance violated. System lockdown initiated. The message pulsed once, twice, then was replaced by another line. That made my second whiskey taste even better. Federal agencies notified. Acquisition approval suspended. Through the windows of the 22nd floor, I could see silhouettes moving frantically behind the glass. People pointing at screens, making phone calls, probably shouting questions that nobody could answer. The carefully orchestrated acquisition presentation had become a crisis management disaster. My phone started ringing immediately. Not just buzzing with text messages, but actually ringing with incoming calls every 30 seconds. Brandon, Janet, Mark, even numbers I didn't recognize. Probably board members who'd gotten emergency calls about the system lockdown. I let them all go to voicemail. The lockdown wasn't permanent, despite what the screen said. The system could be restored, but only through a specific procedure that required coordination between multiple federal agencies, extensive documentation of the cause and justification for the emergency override, and most importantly, verification that proper security protocols were back in place. That meant Secure Flow would need a qualified chief security officer to oversee the restoration process. Someone with the appropriate clearances, institutional knowledge, and federal certifications to satisfy regulatory requirements. Someone exactly like me. The irony was perfect. Brandon had fired me to demonstrate Secure Flow's commitment to modern efficiency, and now he needed me back to prove the company could meet basic compliance standards. But here's the thing about bridges. Once you burn them, crossing back over gets complicated. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Rick, please call me. The buyers are asking questions we can't answer." Another buzz, this time from Mark. "System won't accept any credentials. Everything's locked down." Brandon's panicking, and finally, the message I'd been waiting for. From Brandon himself. "We need to talk. Name your terms." I finished my second whiskey and signaled Tommy for the check. The voicemails could wait. The text messages could wait. Brandon's desperation could definitely wait. Because for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't the one dealing with a crisis on someone else's timeline. I wasn't dropping everything to fix problems that couldn't wait, weren't my fault, and definitely weren't being handled properly by management. Today, I was just a guy having lunch at Murphy's Pub, watching his former employer learn the difference between disrupting legacy systems and understanding why those systems existed in the first place. The acquisition deal was dead. The buyers would walk away rather than risk federal scrutiny, and Brandon would have to explain to the board of directors how a routine personnel change had cost the company a $240 million buyout. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, I had somewhere else to be. I had somewhere else to be that afternoon, and it wasn't answering desperate phone calls from my former employer. My niece Sarah had a robotics competition at Lincoln Middle School, something I'd promised to attend months ago but kept pushing off because of work emergencies that never seemed to end. For once, someone else could handle the crisis while I kept a promise that actually mattered. The drive to the school gave me time to think about what had just happened. 20 years of building cybersecurity systems, and it had taken exactly 4 hours and 2 minutes for Brandon Walsh to prove why those systems existed in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd fired me for being resistant to innovation, then immediately demonstrated why resistance might have been the smart play. Sarah's team was competing in the Autonomous Navigation Challenge, programming small robots to navigate obstacle courses without human control. Watching 12-year-olds debug code and troubleshoot mechanical problems reminded me why I'd gotten into technology in the first place. Before cybersecurity became about protecting billion-dollar transactions and satisfying federal regulators, it was about solving problems and building things that worked. "Uncle Rick!" Sarah waved from across the gymnasium. "You made it!" First time in 6 months I'd kept a family commitment. Felt better than any performance review I'd ever received. During the competition, my phone kept buzzing with calls and messages. I turned it face down and focused on watching Sarah's team adjust their robot sensors between runs. The persistence reminded me of my early days at Secure Flow, when technical problems required patience and systematic thinking rather than panic and shortcuts. By 4 p.m., Sarah's team had won second place in their division. Not bad for a group of kids working with borrowed equipment and open-source software. We went for ice cream afterward, and she told me about her plans to study computer engineering in college. "Is it hard building computer systems?" she asked. "The building part's not that difficult," I said. "The hard part is making sure the right people can use them and the wrong people can't." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Kids usually understand security better than adults. They know the difference between sharing and trusting. When I finally checked my phone that evening, I had 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. The voicemails told the whole story. Brandon's confidence had collapsed along with his acquisition deal. The Chicago buyers had withdrawn their offer pending resolution of regulatory compliance concerns. The New York firm had done the same. Janet Morrison's message was the most informative. Rick, the SEC wants documentation of all security protocols before they'll clear us for future acquisition discussions. The buyers think we're hiding systemic problems. Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please call me. Mark Collins' update was more direct. Systems still locked. Brandon tried calling federal agencies directly. That went about as well as you'd expect. They want the chief security officer to file restoration paperwork. The chief security officer, the position that had been eliminated that morning for being outdated and unnecessary. Brandon's final voicemail, left at 6:43 p.m., was a masterpiece of desperation disguised as negotiation. Rick, I may have been hasty this morning. There's obviously been some miscommunication about your role and the transition timeline. Let's discuss how we can resolve this situation professionally. The board's authorized me to make whatever adjustments are necessary. Miscommunication. 20 years of institutional knowledge, and he called it miscommunication. The next morning, I drove to downtown Springfield for a breakfast meeting with Tom Mitchell, Chief Information Officer at First National Bank. We'd worked together on cybersecurity standards committees for years, and he'd been trying to recruit me for the past 6 months. Heard about your situation at Secure Flow, Tom said over coffee. Word travels fast in our industry. News travels fast. Truth travels faster. He smiled. We've got a position opening up, Chief Information Security Officer, leading our digital transformation initiative. Interested in hearing details? The offer was straightforward. 30% salary increase, equity participation, and most importantly, an executive team that understood the difference between innovation and recklessness. First National had survived every financial crisis since 1887 by respecting institutional knowledge while adapting to new realities. One question, I said. If I build security systems for you, will you fire me for building them too well? Tom laughed. Rick, we want you to build them so well that even our CEO can't break them. I accepted the offer that afternoon. Secure Flow Financial never recovered from the acquisition collapse. The regulatory investigation revealed multiple compliance shortcuts Brandon had implemented to streamline operations. The company was sold 8 months later to a competitor for roughly 20% of the original asking price. Brandon Walsh now works for a startup in Austin, developing blockchain solutions for cryptocurrency trading. According to LinkedIn, he's still disrupting legacy systems and driving digital transformation initiatives. Sometimes I wonder if he learned anything from that Tuesday morning in September. Probably not. Some people view failure as feedback. Others view it as bad luck. The system restoration at Secure Flow took 6 weeks and cost them $3.2 million in consulting fees. They had to hire external cybersecurity firms to rebuild protocols I'd documented in detail before my termination. The irony was perfect. They paid strangers 10 times my annual salary to recreate work I'd already completed, but that was their choice to make. Just like it was my choice to spend Tuesday afternoon watching my niece's robotics team instead of fixing problems I didn't create for people who didn't respect the work. The system always knows who built it, and it never forgets.